left this, I told you that Joseph Stalin's kind of going across Europe and communizing. I don't even know if this word communizing. Well, they use communization. Should make sense. If not, I'm sorry. Um, and so Churchill comes to the United States, gives his famous Iron Curtain speech, and so Truman decides to act. Now, Truman will go before Congress and before other things, and will issue what becomes known later on as the Truman Doctrine. If you remember, a doctrine is a way of doing something. At this point, the main one we really have talked about is Monroe Doctrine. But in the Truman Doctrine, Truman basically says that any country who is threatened by communism, but in this case becoming a satellite nation, becoming communized, if you will, the United States will send aid. And by that, it could be weapons, it could be food. It's probably not going to be troops per se. So the Truman Doctrine is that. Now, the kind of offshoot ideology that comes out of Truman Doctrine is called containment. What he's saying, I'm going to give you money to stop from becoming communist, but what he's really trying to say is we're going to pin in communism, much like this, all right? Therefore, is there. Now in class, I like to give the example of a little puppy. You get a new puppy, and the puppy goes and pees all over the house, marking its territory, much like a Stalin, correct? And so you, being the Truman that you are, put them inside of here. That way, if they pee, it's one localized area and not your entire house. In the case of that, if we can close in Stalin as that little puppy and he pees communism, we know where it is. It's contained in this one little area and not everywhere. Okay, so that's Truman. What Truman really is trying to do, because he is afraid, after all, that the USSR will spread to the United States, to Western Europe, to Israel, Pakistan, China, Japan, and some of these places do actually fall to communism. So that's an interesting thing. Now, the first place where we see the Truman Doctrine and containment really come into play is an area of the world that we call the Mediterranean Rim. By that, they mean countries that border the Mediterranean. In particular, of note, will be Greece, will be Turkey, and also Iran. I know Iran's kind of in here, but Greece and Turkey are the two big ones. There are infighting between communist rebels against the government, and they're trying to overthrow the government to set up a communist state. Communism at its heart says you have to overthrow capitalism and instill some type of thing. So that's what they're trying to do here. So we send aid, we send money, etc., and we resist the communist. The communism has been contained. And so, yay, this is working. Now, the way I like to tell people to remember this, and maybe this is kind of gross, but you're welcome. Truman was contained to the bathroom because of greasy turkey. And so if you remember Greece and greasy turkey and, ooh, I'm going to be contained, and who was contained? Truman. Maybe that's the idea, but Truman will try to suppress communism, and he is able to do that in these countries as well as Iran, and it leads to some other things we're going to talk about. Okay? Now, the next thing we have is George Kennan. We didn't fully understand communism, and so people said, how can you be afraid of something that you don't understand? And so we've got to go and learn about communism. Now, George Kennan had been an ambassador to Russia before they closed their doors on us, and had known Stalin pretty well and some other high important officials, and we asked him to explain to us what were the goals of the Soviet Union. What were they ultimately trying to do? Now, George Kennan will come back with a document that you have in your packet that is called the Long Telegram. Basically, telegrams are supposed to be small snippets of information. This is a long snippet of information, basically saying that communism wants a world revolution and wants countries to become communist like them. And so, to the United States, that signals we've got to defeat communism because it would threaten democracy. You remember the thing about those wars, both wars, we said we're going to go for democracy. And so no different thing here. Now the next video we're going to look at is how we actually tried to contain them, containment going forward, and two things called the Marshall Plan and the Berlin Crisis. All right, so we'll talk about that later.